wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of the Almighty God be upon us all. It is an honor to see you all here this evening. Thank you for taking the time out to join us. If I may first of all point out there's some fire exits on the right and there's some bathrooms on the left hand side if you need them. And if we can also thank the Jet Centre for the kind use of the facilities. Project Welcome is a group of local volunteers. Our main aims are to build bridges between Muslims and our neighbours within the community. It's also to try and portray a true image of what Islam is and to build a support network for new Muslims. Previous topics have included women in Islam, Ramadan, the month of fasting, Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, and what Islam truly is. If after this evening anybody requires any further information or would like to have a chat with anybody, there is an email address and there is a phone number, so please feel free to contact us. This evening consists mainly of the talk, following which there will be a 20-minute break. Please help yourselves to refreshments. During the break, there are cards on every chair, so if you have any questions, any comments, please write them down, pass them to the volunteers, and following on from the break, we'll have a short question and answer session. We are very fortunate this evening to have a narrator of this caliber with us. Shaykh Abu Jafar al-Hanbali was born in America, graduated in America, and has been able to study under various illustrious teachers. He currently teaches at the Lote Institute in Nottingham. And if I may, I'll hand over to the speaker.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, I appreciate the invitation of being invited down to speak on the topic of Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam and regarding how we as Muslims understand him. I think before I can accurately address this topic, I need to first of all define terms. A topic of this size, I have a limited period of time on, so I want to summarize the points and to try to give you a very concentrated, albeit brief, piece on what it is that we have been told in the Quran about him. The information that I'm going to give to you tonight is taken from the Quran, which is 6,236 verses, and the Ahadith, which spans over some 500 collections of books. So what I'm going to give is nothing new, although the delivery that I might give it in may be something that some of you may have heard for the first time, or maybe hearing for the first time in this particular way. Now, when we talk about him, we have to start first of all looking at his title. The full name of him is Al-Masih Isa ibn Maryam. The Messiah, Isa, son of Maryam. Now the word Al-Masih, Isa ibn Maryam, in the Hebrew is it's Yeshua HaMashiach ben Maryam, which is Yeshua, which is the original Hebrew of his name, son of Maryam, the Messiah. Al-Masih or HaMashiach in Arabic or Hebrew means to be anointed. So he is the anointed one. He is the one who is to be the final prophet for the children of Israel. What that means is this. In a hadith in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, between Isa and myself, there was no prophet. What that signifies is he's the last Israelite prophet to come. He is the last and greatest of all of the Israelite prophets. Hence he's bearing the title Al-Masih. There will be no more Israelite prophets to come, so at the ending of his mission ends the period of prophecy for the Israelite people. Whereas the covenant that Allah had made with other nations was realized at the end through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's a basic nutshell. Before I talk about him directly, we have to understand how Muslims view prophets and prophecy. There is an ayah in the Quran in which Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, you who believe, ati'u Allah, obey Allah, wa ati'u Rasul, obey the Messenger, wa ulil amri minkum, and those in authority among you. This verse in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th Surah, 59, signifies that this ummah, or this nation, Muslims, throughout history, the human race has always been ruled by prophets or the successors of prophets. So our belief is that the human family, the human nation, is ruled by prophets or those bearing the authority or standard of the prophets. Therefore, it is important that we know everything possible about these prophets, what they've commanded, and their message that's been left behind. This is, in the beginning, what we should understand. So some of what I'm going to say is historical, but some of what I'm going to say is theological because it goes to how we as Muslims view leadership, governance, and the wrapping up of history. The birth of the Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam, both Muslims and Christians are agreed that his birth was miraculous. He was born without a father, and he was born to a righteous mother, who we refer to as Maryam as-Siddiqah. The spot where he is born, if you go to, whether we're calling it Israel or Palestine, you go to the Church of Nativity, both Muslims and Orthodox Christians are agreed that the spot where they burn incense every day, and especially on masses, is the spot where he was born. We're both agreed on that. And that spot is located in Beit Laham today. So we're agreed that he was born there. Both of us are agreed. As for his first miracle was, we believe that the Prophet Isa alayhi, according to Surah Maryam, the 19th Surah, that he spoke as a baby. And the first thing he did was to announce his prophethood and that he had come into the world. His mother before then, Maryam, was a young woman, unmarried, without any blemish on her record. She was told that she will bear this child who will be Al-Masih. He will be the Messiah of his people. And this child, as the Messiah of his people, will warn them, will guide them, and admonish them. When he's born, he then confirms what his mother has said, because a charge of unchastity is labeled against her, is levied against her. And in the gathering of people, the baby in his mother's arms says, I am one of Allah's prophets, and I tell you the truth, and narrated the whole series of events. The events after that, for the most part, are going to follow along with what Christians would understand as the mission of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, except in 2 points. Both Christians and Muslims are agreed that he is the Messiah. Both Christians and Muslims are agreed that he is the greatest of the Israelite prophets. The difference comes in what are the full ramifications of that and what was his ultimate end. Everything else we're agreed on. Full ramifications of what he means and his ultimate end. Those are the areas where we disagree on, and that's what we're going to come to in a moment. His miracles, as I said, include him speaking as a baby. In Surah Maryam, as well as in Surah Al-Imran, that's the 3rd Surah of the Quran, he has taken a piece of clay, formed it into the shape of a bird, blew into it, mentioned Allah's name, and this became a living bird. Another one of his miracles was that he healed someone who was born blind. So this meant that this individual was born without the sockets. They weren't someone who went blind over time because of macular degeneration. They were born without the eye sockets, and he healed them. And they grew the eyes and they grew the sockets in this person regain their vision. He healed the lepers, people whose limbs had fallen off. He healed lepers. He healed those, he raised the dead. All of these are things that can be definitely traced to him in the Quran as well as in the Sunnah. He lived a righteous life. He did not marry, and he eschewed all different types of sin. In addition to this, he prophesied a number of incidents that would occur. One of which was in Surah Al-Saf, the 61st surah of the Quran. He prophesied the coming of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we believe that the Messiah prophesied the coming of the end prophet. And this end prophet was none other than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the final prophet. Something that's very important to understand, that we as Muslims, we do not believe that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a Messiah or the Messiah or a type of Messiah. We're very clear on this, that there's one Messiah, and that Messiah is the Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam. His disciples were 12 in number, and they are referred to in Surah An-Nisa as Al-Hawariyun. Al-Hawariyun means disciples, but literally in Arabic, when you look in the dictionaries and lexicons, it means those who wear white. So they were known for their clothing, they were very humble, they were very modest. And most of the names, which are translations in Arabic from the Aramaic, are the same names that many Christians recognize. The Prophet Isa alayhi's life, however, was a life of difficulty because he moved from Bethlehem to Nazareth to Galilee to Jerusalem. And one of his prophecies before ascension was, he said that because the people rejected him, and they also rejected the Prophet Yahya, which is John the Baptist, alayhi salam, that Allah would judge Jerusalem. The final step in that prophet, a man asked to marry his own niece. The Prophet Yahya, or John alayhi salam, refused this and said this was an abomination. He was murdered, his head was severed from his body, and the marriage went ahead anyway. This was seen as the final sign before the destruction of a rebellious people. So the Prophet Isa alayhi salam made a number of prophecies, one of which was his own ascension and his second coming. But before that happened, his first cousin, which is the Prophet Yahya or John alayhi salam, his first cousin was murdered. After the murder of his first cousin, there was an attempt made on the life of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, which failed. So when you read Surah An-Nisa, ayat 130 on, the fourth surah of the Quran, you will see that there is a mention in which Allah has said, they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. But it was made to appear that way to them. That expression, to scholars of commentary, the earliest scholars of commentary, means that he was not crucified. He was not killed. He wasn't even hung on the cross. In recent times, and what I mean by recent is probably from the 1970s onward, there's been a type of theology in which they have stated that the Prophet Isa alayhi salam was put on the cross, but fainted, was taken out, put into the tomb, revived, and then escaped. However, this theology, if I'm being complimentary, I would say is heterodox, and is espoused by perhaps 3 people. But as I said, I'm being charitable by calling it heterodox, because it doesn't belong to anything to do with the first 3 generations of Muslims who believe that he wasn't crucified at all. There are a number of keys that are supposed to take place before the Prophet Isa alayhi salam comes back again. So he ascended in 33 AD, and he is believed to come again. But there are a number of things that must take place before that happens. If you read Surah Al-Hashr, which is the 59th surah, the first 5 lines talk about an exile and an ingathering. One of the things that must happen before he comes back is the children of Israel, the Israelites, they have to first of all be scattered, which happened in 70 AD when Titus came, destroyed the second temple, and razed the area to the ground. They have to be scattered. After they're scattered, they then have to be brought back to the land, the historical land of where their forefathers were once. This historical land is today referred to as Israel and Jordan, but that is the historical landmass that those people left from when they were scattered. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in the hadith in Tabarani, this hadith reads, quote, "One of the signs of the end of time is the children of Israel will come back to the land of Sham." Sham includes Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Israel. This is one of the end signs. And this has happened. With the Israelites coming back to the land, they have not been removed from the land. And they will not be removed from the land until Allah has completed the plan that is to go ahead. Because of the false Messiah, which is the antithesis of the Prophet Isa, which is another thing that we have. The false Messiah, which is referred to as the Antichrist, he is to come as well. If you have no state of Israel, you have no strong Israelites in the ancient land, you have no people preparing for a second temple, you have no Messiah that they're waiting for, although we've stated already that the Prophet Isa is the Messiah. If you don't have any of those things, you don't have any end-time prophecy, and you don't have any second coming. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said in the hadith, the children of Israel are waiting for the Messiah, son of David, but that is the false Messiah. The difference between the Muslim, the Jew, and the Christian is an understanding that cuts 3 ways. For the Muslim and the Christian, they both affirm that he is the Messiah, the greatest of the Israelite prophets. But they depart because the Muslims do not believe that he's deity, or that he is a replacement sacrifice for sin, in which case those that have received the blood from the cross of Calvary have their sins washed away, and now they're wearing his robes of righteousness, and they are acceptable in the sight of God. Muslims don't believe that. On the other side of that, the Muslims with the Jews agree in a Messiah. But the Muslims do not accept that the Prophet Isa was a false prophet, which is the position of ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox Judaism, that he was a false prophet. Now they're charitable. But when you read their original documents, sometimes they don't even mention his name. They say that one from Nazareth, or the one to whom you were referring. They refuse to mention his name. No. We believe and accept him, whether we say Yeshua or we say Isa, we believe him. At around the time, just before his coming, the children of Israel come into the land, and they cannot be removed from the land. They will not be uprooted. What I'm telling you is a fact. It doesn't matter whether it's Hamas, doesn't matter whether it's Hezbollah. I'm not a politician. I speak through the eyes of theology, which explains to us history. It doesn't matter who it is. The Israelites will not be lifted from their land. And there's a reason why they won the 1948 war, the 1956 war, the 1958 war, the 1967 war, the 1973 war, and every single major conflict since then. Because Allah has put them there supernaturally. And as we all know, those of us that believe in a Lord that has power over everything, nothing can go against his plan when he's done it. That aside, we know that Palestinians are suffering oppression and everything else, but we're talking them being in the land. That's what we're talking about. Just before his coming, the false Messiah is to appear first. And the false Messiah will demand that the people worship him. He will start off declaring himself, he's an untested politician. This untested politician starts off by declaring himself righteous, then prophet, then King, then Messiah, then Lord. This is how it starts. After that time, incredible tribulation starts, Al-Malhamatul Kubra, which in English is the Great Tribulation, 7 years, in which anyone who does not worship him is executed. An incident occurs that for some reason draws Muslims and Christians together in a mutual battle against the forces of the false Messiah. After that, there starts to be a number of other incidents that occur, which are 3 in number. One is the children of Israel rediscover the Ark of the Covenant. There will be a man from the household of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, whose name is Muhammad ibn Abdullah, known by the title Al-Imam al-Mahdi. He will have the Ark of the Covenant, which will be taken out of Lake Tiberias. A delegation of rabbis will see that, and there will be a mass conversion of that delegation of rabbis from Judaism to Islam when they see the original tablets. Because the original tablets, which disappeared at the First Temple period from the First Temple of Solomon, will be seen there. They will see the headpieces of Moses and Aaron. They will see the sample of manna and salwa and the staff that was budding that Harun had, the staff that was budding that Nabi Musa had. They will see these things and they will believe because they'll see the Ark of the Covenant. Then the Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam will descend. He will come back, the second coming, the parousia, the apocalypsis. He will come again. The question is asked, but from where? I was speaking to evangelical Christians in the United States. They said, well, obviously he's coming to New York. He's got to come there first because that's the center of civilization, that's the center of what's going on in the world right now. No. Where he's coming, according to what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, is he's coming to Damascus. And he will go from Damascus to Jerusalem. Now there is one masjid in Damascus that has no imam, and it is that masjid that he is believed to come to. It's the only masjid in the Muslim world that has no imam, no leader. He will come to this masjid. As he said in the hadith, mentioned by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, just as I left, so shall I come. Now the description that we have of him is of a tall man with a long brown forked beard, dark eyes, long hair, wearing a white headdress with a blue stripe over it, a long white robe, obviously no buttons because this particular design didn't exist back then, a long robe going all the way down past his ankles with fringes, and 2 strap sandals. He has said that before he ascended, he had made ritual washing to prepare for prayers. When he comes back, his beard will still be wet from that washing that he did. What that means is the same way he left all those thousands of years ago is the same way he comes again. The exact same way. We believe that. We don't believe that he's going to be coming in Levi's 501s or Jordache or Reebok. We don't believe that. We believe he's going to come the same way, Aramaic, that language, speaking the same language, exact same clothes, exact same look. We believe he's going to come the same way, and this will be a global visitation. This extraterrestrial invasion, we can believe it because it's coming. And it's real. It won't be grays, it won't be greens, won't be flying saucers, it will be a real global invasion. Because it's mentioned in another hadith that there will be angels that will be with him accompanying. So this wasn't something that you might miss if you're watching C-SPAN or QVC. It's something that is clear and obvious that you will witness for definite. What does his coming represent to the Muslim? The coming of the Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam represents this to the Muslim. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in the hadith, Nabuwa, prophethood has come to an end. After me, I will have successors. My successors shall be 30 years. After that time, there will be kings. After that time, there will be tyrants. Then after that time shall come the successor on my way of the past. And then the end shall come. What that means is, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that brought to an end the human race being ruled by prophets and being guided by prophets. Now you had the colleagues, the followers, the believers, the representatives of those prophets. That was for 30 years. After that began a period of kingship. Then after that began a period of tyrants, which in Arabic is referred to as al-jababira, the tyrants. We are now in the period of the tyrants. At the end of the period of the tyrants comes the Mahdi, who is the last Imam. He's the last representative of the prophetic epoch who rules the Muslim world. But at the end of his rule, it's handed back over to the Prophet Isa. So we're back at being ruled by prophets, the natural state of the human race. So the Muslim looks forward to the government that Allah has brought about, whether that government is through prophets or that government is through the representatives of those prophets. All governments outside of that are illegitimate and will come to an end and are by nature fleeting. All of us know, we can see, that all governments outside of what the Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam, that great prophet, that Messiah, all prophets outside what he's brought, what the prophets of old have brought, and what their representatives have brought, are by nature fleeting, false, and fall. But we have to look forward to an end age. And that end age, that end time, that akhir al-zaman, that end of time, is what's coming with the Prophet Isa alayhi salam coming again as the Messiah to govern over and rule over humanity. During that time, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, when he comes again, the end of wars is for a certainty. You shall find lions playing with lambs, and a child being able to put his head inside of that of a lion and not be harmed. We find the end of what we know, of what we understand as this current scheme of things, it comes to an end. Now, how long does this last? Because for those that understand anything about Christian theology or Christology, they're going to discuss a millennial kingdom. And there'll be discussions of whether you're amillennial, pre-trib, post-trib, whether there'll be a tribulation, whether there'll be a rapture. The Prophet Isa Islam, he rules over this kingdom, he rules over humanity, he is their king for 40 years. For 40 years. After this period of time, he dies. And after that comes a wind from Syria, a cool, calm wind that every Muslim that smells that wind dies. This is the rapture, what in Arabic is called al-qadr. Now you have, and among the Christians, those who believe in pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. For the Muslims, it's all trib. It's all rapture. One rapture coming at the end, and the Muslims that smell that wind, according to Hadith of the Sahih Muslim, they die. And this is when the remaining signs that are only seen by those who are not saved, they will see the remaining signs, the sun rising from the west, all these other tribulations, Muslims will be saved from those horrors. No one shall remain except those who reject faith and cannot live, because they've rejected faith and they've lived after the period of the rapture. Then the day of judgment comes. This, in a nutshell, is the core theology that I've laid out for you. As I said, I had to give it in a Reader's Digest condensation. The nutshell of everything of what Muslims believe the Messiah represents in their religion. Now I want to start by wrapping up a few things. When we discuss the Prophet Isa alayhi salam as the Messiah, When we discuss his role in history, what he represents, as I said, both the Christian and the Muslim and the Jew will find some points of convergence. But then after that comes divergences. If someone wants to understand a very systematic treatment of this issue, your first stop would probably be the Quran, in which you would read Surah An-Nisa, the 4th surah, Surah Al-Imran, the 3rd surah, and Surah Maryam, the 19th surah. They are quite long. Al-Imran is 199 ayat, Surah An-Nisa is 174, and Maryam is more than 60. But if you want a detailed, full, systematic, unvarnished treatment of it, you can return to the Quran of the Muslims that Allah has revealed to us and read it. If you're looking for further details, for example, more of a theological treatment where the scholars deal with these matters, I would say that you would look at probably altafsir.com, because you can look at the verses from the Quran and to examine the commentaries to understand what the theology is of the Muslims. A great deal of what we've seen, unfortunately, is although the Muslims have been speaking in the English-speaking world for a number of years, what I've given you tonight has probably not been presented in a systematic fashion like this before, at least not in the form that I've given it. There's a number of reasons why, and we don't have time to go over that tonight. But what I would say is the Muslim and the Christian, or the Muslim and the one who doesn't believe in Islam at all, whether he's a Christian or a Jew. The Muslim and the non-Muslim have these 3 points to think about. And I'll leave you with these. The first is this. The world has a creator, has a Lord, has a master, and a king. That master, king, creator, and Lord has laid down a predetermined plan and has laid out his plan of salvation from the beginning, before the foundation stone of the earth was laid. Number 2, Allah has sent prophets as shepherds to call those sheep who will listen and only can listen because Allah has given them salvation and His mercy, which enables them to listen so that they can respond, so that they can have salvation, so that they can be guided. He has sent prophets as leaders, and He has sent representatives after the prophets that act as leaders. In addition to this, I would say that those leaders after the prophets continue today to guide the Muslims aright. They're known as the Maraji' or the Marja' people. And there are 40 of these in every age. And they guide the Muslims aright. They're referred to as the Maraji', the authorities. And they are the emulators of the example of the prophets, but more specifically, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They are the emulators of these examples. And they have temporal and spiritual power, and they are global representatives of the Muslims. Number 3, the end of this whole system as we know it is coming to an end. And everything is returning to how it had been in the beginning. And how the human race had been in the beginning is the human race had the best leaders. And there are no better leaders for the human race than the prophets. And there are no better examples after the prophets than those who follow the prophets and those who are the representatives of those prophets. It is for this reason that the representatives of the prophets are mentioned 4 times in the Quran, being referred to as ulul amr, the people of authority, being referred to as alladhina yastanbitunahu minhum, those who are able to do derivation and derive laws. They're referred to as the Ahl al-Dhikr, the people of remembrance, and they're referred to as the people of fiqh because these are the people in charge of the affairs of the entire Muslim world. So I say, in ending all of this, that as Muslims we believe that the Prophet Isa alayhi'salaam is part of end time prophecy. He is part of the end of all things. But he is not the end of all things, but he is part of the end of all things. He is part of what represents the end of a wicked system and the end of a humanity in rebellion and the beginning of the humanity being reconciled back to its Lord. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم واستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم الحمد الرحيم. I appreciate everyone for listening. I don't know whether I ran over or to come just under, but I'm not good at these timekeeping things. I'm normally not on time with things like this. So I appreciate everyone for listening, and inshallah, I look forward to interacting and having spirited but friendly discussion and possibly cross-examination.
Right, 20 minutes break. Please help yourself to refreshments. There is some hot drinks in the kitchen. There's food laid down at the back. If you have any comments, any questions, please make a note of them. If you pass them to the volunteers who will be milling around, and then we can start the question and answer session. So, thank you very much. If I may, what we'll do is we'll begin with a few of the questions and we'll let the speaker answer them. Question: who was the promised son of Abraham in the Islamic tradition?
Now, this question is conditioned because of the fact that Christians will understand that it is Isaac or Ishaq. For the Muslims, when we look at the promised son or we look at the son of promise, we see that son of promise as Ishmael or Ishmael. In English, we see him as the promised son. Now, what we mean by promised son is the one who the final prophet shall come through. We do believe that the Prophet Ishaq alayhi'salaam, or Ishaq or Isaac is the promised son in the sense of the Messiah shall come through his line. But the end of all things and all matters being resolved, all things being brought to an end and the culmination of all prophecy, that comes through the line of Nabi Ismail or Ishmael. That's that position.
If there was no crucifixion, how did the events unfold? What exactly happened to Jesus?
Now, the answer to this question is found in a very long hadith in which it was mentioned that the people came to try to take the Prophet Isa Islam, but the night they were trying to take him, he ascended. So on that night, he ascended. And so the ascension for us was the end of the first phase of his earthly mission. So he ascended. And that's what happened. So he was not crucified, but rather he ascended on the night where they were going to try to crucify him.
Why would Allah make it appear that Jesus died on the cross if in fact he did not?
All right, this is most likely a reflection of something I mentioned regarding a theology that is present today since the 1970s, in which it is believed by some, and this would include the Ahmadiyya Jama'ah, which believe that there are a succession of prophets that still exist today in the sense of successors to who they believe is the Messiah, Muhammad Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian. They believe that the Prophet Isa Islam was placed on the cross, swooned, and was taken to the tomb and woke up. This is also the position of Ahmed Didat, as well as Zakir Naik, as well as Shabir Ali. This is their position. However, this is not the orthodox position of the Muslims. This is heterodox. So this is a question rather that would need to be answered to them, or need to be answered by them, because we don't even grant the premise.
Can Muslims be confident that those who are identified as the prophets of the present age are genuinely and authentically so identified?
I think this is most likely to do with the question regarding the Muraja, that after the prophets, there are the representatives of the prophets. So I think I probably didn't explain it clearly enough. We don't believe that after the Prophet Muhammad there are still prophets. We believe that there are representatives that follow his pattern, that are his successors, that come after him. Now, how are these successors identified? The successors that were identified are identified in the same way that they were when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ died. When he died, the scholars that were living around him, they selected these people. So it wasn't by direct election through the masses. It was by selection of people who he had already designated as leaders. And those people selected them. And those people, after they died, they left behind instructions as to how this was to be done. And this process still happens today. So the leaders that you'll find of these people, the leaders that you'll find, which are referred to as abdad, or the 40 high-ranking scholars, those people have either direct lineal ascent to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, direct lineal descent to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or they are related to him theologically through the fact that they've been chosen through successor after successor after successor. So we believe in a successorship, what I think you would call apostolic. We believe that the authority is apostolic. So we believe it's through a divine succession that has been handed down infallibly again and again and again. In that area, I think we'd be probably more closely related to the Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox patriarchs, rather than being related to the Anglicans or others, unless we looked at, say, what they call high church Anglicans, who ally themselves more closely to the Catholic Church, the Roman rite of the Catholic Church. In that area, we're more closely related to them than we would be, say, evangelical Christians who do not believe in apostolic authority, but rather they believe that all the disciples were granted authority and that authority is transferred through the church.
How does the word and the example of the prophets impact the life of Muslims and non-Muslims in today's world?
Okay. So we're still looking at that from the question of the muraja. How do the muraja impact matters in today's world? Okay, that's a valid question. Their impact is that they have both global and temporal and spiritual authority and jurisdiction. So when you look at issues that have to do with things like the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, they give pronouncements on whether it's valid for Muslims in those countries to resist or to engage in warfare. They are the ones who can decide whether or not there is warfare, whether it's valid. An example of one of their pronouncements was when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The Murajid made consensus that it was valid for the Muslims to defend themselves against the Soviet Union and to use deadly force against Soviet troops. The Murajid also convened and made consensus that it is valid for the Muslims to defend themselves from the Russian Empire in the Chechen province and to use deadly force against the Chechen province. The Murajid now on another level say, okay, well that's warfare. What about on a social level? On a social level, it was the Murajid, the authorities, that gave rulings regarding IVF treatment. If you get the opportunity to research Dr. Michael Debicki, he was the one that innovated surgery regarding the use of the pig aorta. No one wanted to try the surgery out in the United States, in the UK, but he approached, because he's from the Arab world, he approached one of the Marajas in the Arab world, and they gave him permission to do it on the condition that because the pig is an impure animal, that he tries to think of some synthetic alternative in the future. And that completely revolutionized artificial heart valve use, where it started out with just being a pig heart valve and it moved to being a synthetic valve. And now that's saved the lives of thousands of people. So the Murajid have impact on the level when we're talking about war, when we're talking about social matters, when we're talking about medicine. I'll give a final example. In the Gulf, Christians and Jews and other religions have come into the Gulf countries, which are viewed as sacred territory, and they're working there. Now the question was put to the Murajid, these are people, Christians and Jews, use alcohol in their ceremonies. Some of them. The Jews use it for the Kiddushin when they do the Shabbat services. The Christians that believe in the use of wine for the Eucharist and the presentation of the host when he says, this is my blood, this is my body, now eat and drink of them, they use these. Alcohol is forbidden for us, but not for them used responsibly in these matters. what shall we do? Because we cannot forbid them by law, our law, from use of these items. So what do we do? The Muraji convened, and they came to the ruling that you should issue the liquor licenses to them and to them alone, because the prohibition against alcohol covers Muslims and not them, because the peculiarities of their religion require this, and we don't interfere with those. So we issue the liquor licenses on the condition that they don't advertise for alcohol, they don't put billboards, and they don't entice other Muslims with it, and that the alcohol that's there is kept in specific zones where we can keep track and access of how much alcohol is coming in and out of the country. That's something that the lower level scholars, who were your sheikhs and your muftis, or what are called in English mullahs, something that they couldn't do because they didn't have the authority, the jurisdiction, the gravitas to issue those rulings. Now the question, or the final portion of what I'm saying is, how is someone qualified as a marja? Someone's qualified as a marja when they have memorized the Quran, which is 6,236 verses or 8,640 lines. They have qualified to the level of judge or faqih within their prospective legal school. And there are 4 legal schools that have been handed down to us through time. And these legal schools are ways of interpreting, exacting, and making sense of the revealed law. And then after that, they have an encompassing understanding of the book and the sunnah are the hadith in these collections, and then how to apply them in a relevant fashion. And they're given test cases to check out that they're sound. And then a living marja qualifies them, chooses them, and gives them permission to then give rulings and refers them as a marja. An example of a marja that you might know of merely because of what happened, if you look him up probably online, is the late Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id al-Buluti. He was a marja of Syria. He was murdered on television while giving a dars in the masjid because he refused to acknowledge that the uprisings in the Arab world were valid. Most marja do not believe that the Arab Spring is valid because they think it's bringing more violence than righteousness, and they think that it's a gateway to wickedness. And he was murdered for that position.
Messiah references himself many times, identified as the Son of Man, but not the common Son of Man found in the Old Testament, but the Daniel 7, eternal King, whom has all authority and sovereignty, power forever. It is clear from the verses that he sees himself as the Daniel 7 Son of Man. How does that fit with Islamic theology?
Alhamdulillah. I'd already discussed it with our friend before, but I'll truncate the answer. What it basically comes down to is this: we would accept that when we're talking temporal authority, that when he comes back, the Prophet Isa, the Messiah, has temporal authority, temporal and spiritual authority. And as a prophet, his temporal and spiritual authority extends globally over the human race. And he has that authority permanently. But when you're talking, say, the day of judgment, the ultimate judge on the day of judgment is Allah, the King, the sovereign for all. And we do not believe that the Messiah is the one who carries out the judgment or dispenses judgment on the day of resurrection. But in this life, when he comes to rule as the king over the human race, he has all authority committed to him to rule in a global sense, because prophets have global jurisdiction and authority.
Does anybody have any further questions? Any comments?
On the Son of Man point, the Daniel 7 prophecy is very clear in my reading, well, in the English text at least, that it is forever and ever. As in his authority as the king of the earth is forever and ever and ever, and his kingdom will not pass away or be destroyed. So as king forever and ever, that to me doesn't imply that it will ever end.
That's understood. I understand what you're saying. But the Muslims, from our standpoint, that we've been given, and the revealed law that we've been given, is we would not hold that. We understand that his authority is coming from his king and his master, and that authority is permanent. That judgment is permanent. Once someone a prophet is always a prophet, but we wouldn't hold that person, their authority is forever, other than in the sense that the one who designated them that authority is forever, or that the authority where it comes from is forever. So again, this comes down to the difference between the significance of what Muslims see the Messiah representing and what Christians see the Messiah. It's an issue where you have what are called soluble or insoluble differences. This is an insoluble difference because the Christian, right, who believes that Christ is not just king, but he is the one whom all things have been made in the book of Timothy, who there is but one mediator between God and man, namely the Son of Man, Christ Jesus, right? There's no way to reconcile that. In other ways, there is, but this is a way in which there's no way to reconcile this insoluble issue short of the Muslim embracing Christianity or the Christian embracing Islam. They're insoluble issues. So the most I can tell you is we don't hold that position, we don't understand. That's the most I can say, and be clear and straightforward.
So there's an error in Daniel 7. There's an error in
we would either have to say that that's the case or that the understanding is an error. We'd have to say either of those because it's an insoluble difference. It's insoluble.
Anything else? Any final words? Oh, I apologize, sorry.
Coming back to your question, I think about the crucifixion, it seems to me that all the way through Jesus' life he was talking about and the Son of Man shall be laid down for 3 days and then have his life up again in 3 days. And he refers to his death in very clear terms, more than 10 times in the Gospels. And then all of his representatives or apostles or whatever you want to call them believe that he died, and from then onwards believe he died. Why would he A, tell them that he was going to die and then not die, and then B, allow his closest followers to think that he had died when he hadn't died?
Again, that would have to come from the understanding or assumption that he did teach that, and that those books are divinely inspired or divinely revealed, that they have inerrancy. So the only way we could come to that conclusion would be that, and that would be an issue that, again, would require a bigger discussion than here on is the text inerrant and which text is the infallibly preserved Word of God on this topic or other topics. That would be wider than that. Your question is a valid one to ask, but one which is outside of the scope of what we have. And the question has the premise inside of it that text that you have is inerrant.
Yes. Yeah.
And the only way to get to resolve that issue or to speak about that issue would be to have a bigger presentation or a bigger discussion where we could hash that out and address that to discuss what that was. So I apologize. It's just the time.
Just final words.
All right. As a final word, I've been asked to state a final word. I would say that I appreciate everyone coming. I know that there are those who respectfully but stringently disagree with what I've said, or portions of what I've said, or the great bulk or the majority or all of what I've said. But the main point of all of this is that I wanted to give a presentation of this faith that was unvarnished, that was unapologetic, and that was firmly rooted in the Orthodox tradition of the Muslims. I believe fervently that the great bulk of what is being presented as in Islam in English, in lectures and debates, is utterly heretical or heterodox, to be friendly. And that in English, on a wider sense, the true Orthodox faith of the Muslims has not been fully presented. I say this coming from my background, which is coming from the Arab world. What I've stated holds up in Al-Azhar, it holds up in Mustansariya, it holds up in Qaraween, it holds up in all the major seminaries in the Muslim world, what I've stated. But much of what we hear in English is the opposite of that. What I wanted to give tonight was something that, whether it is agreed with or not, or accepted or not, will be something that will maybe trigger a further interest to understand something greater about the Orthodox faith of the Muslims that's carried by 1.5 billion people. Because I know that people here would take great umbrage at me presenting or studying intently the faith of Jehovah's Witnesses and presenting that as the historic Orthodox Christian faith through all eternity. Not just because the Christians view it as, other Christians view it as unacceptable, but because the Jehovah's Witness theology that we know has come about later than the rest of Christian theology, and I've not presented the rest of it, the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, the Coptic, the Ethiopian. I haven't presented in those things. So the orthodoxy of the Muslims has to be presented and examined. Whether someone accepts it or not is a different issue, but rather it's more so that it's presented accurately so people can make a clear decision and come to conclusions.
Thank you very much for your time. And thank you again for joining us this evening. If you do have any further questions, if you wish to talk to anybody about anything else, there is the email and there is the phone number for Project Locum. Please do get in touch. We have left some feedback forms, if you can kindly fill those in. Anybody who's not registered or not left their details, please do so. So for any forthcoming events, we can get in touch. Thank you for your time.